Today we're going to talk about key features again, but this time we are going to focus on key features of linear functions from tables of values instead of looking at the graphs. This will help us kind of see patterns and know what to expect for what the graph should look like. So we are going to talk about the same key features that we did yesterday or in the last lesson. The first is slope, which is the rise over run. Remember yesterday we talked about how the rise over run also is written this way as a fraction. Today we're going to add to that. We're going to call this the change in y over the change in x. So we're going to look at some patterns here and see if we can figure that out. Mathematicians are lazy and like to use symbols. So that little triangle is called a delta, and delta means change. Okay, so if we want to shorten that up and not write the whole thing out, we can say change in y over change in x. Okay, so slope is the same as what we did in the graph. The only difference is we're looking at numbers now, and we have to identify the slope from the numbers. Increasing, decreasing still matters. If the numbers are increasing, both of them are increasing, then it should be a positive. If one is increasing while the other is decreasing, it should be negative. Okay? X-intercept is the point where the line crosses the x-axis. When we're looking at a table of values, that is going to be the value or the point when we have a 0 for a y. Okay, so you're going to have some number here for your x and a 0 for a y. And then for my y-intercept, we're actually going to change that. The y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis, but when we're looking at the table, instead we're going to have a 0 for our x and then something for our y. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some of these. Okay, identify the slope, y-intercept, x-intercept from the table of values. Now, here's the problem. Notice that I don't have zeros for both my x and y. I'm gonna go ahead and add to the table here in a minute. But let's do the slope first. Okay? To do the slope, we talked about the change in y over the change in x. So we have the change in y over the change in x. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out this pattern here. To go from 8 to 7, I subtract 1. To go from 7 to 6, I subtract 1. From 6 to 5, I subtract 1. From 5 to 4, I subtract 1. And from 4 to 3, I subtract 1. So if I do 8 minus 1, I get 7. 7 minus 1, I get 6. 6 minus 1, I get 5. 5 minus 1, I get 4. 4 minus 1, I get 3. Okay? So that number there, since they're all the same, gives us our change in y. So change in y is negative 1. We're going to do the same thing for our x values here. So we're going to go ahead and figure out from 0 to 1, I add 1. From 1 to 2, I add 1. 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 5. I add 1 for each of those. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 1 is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5. So that gave us our change in x. The other side gave us our change in y. Once we have that, we're going to go ahead and put that in our fraction. Change my color back to blue. So our pattern here for our x's was a positive 1. So once you get here, if you can divide it, go ahead and divide it. Otherwise, you need to reduce. Remember, 2 negatives would actually make that fraction positive. So negative 1 divided by 1 gives me a slope of negative 1. Okay? So all we're doing is finding the pattern here for our y's, putting that on the top, then finding the pattern for our x's, put that on the bottom. Simplify your fraction, and you have your slope. Now, my x-intercept, I told you, is when we have a 0 in the y's. And I don't have that, but I can actually continue my table here to get that. So if I add 2, 1, 0 to my pattern, because I'm just subtracting 1 each time, okay. If I follow my pattern on the x's, I'm adding 1. So instead of going from 4 to 5, we're going 5 to 6, and then to 7, and then to 8. Okay? So my x-intercept is going to be the one that has a 0 for my y. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. My 0 for my y gives me my x-intercept. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. So I have the point 8, 0 for my x-intercept. And my y-intercept is going to be the one that has a 0 for my x. Okay, so if I'm looking for the y-intercept, I'm looking for my 0 and my x. So I also have an 8 there. So 0, 8. And that's how you find your key features. Let's go ahead and do 2 more. Okay, so we're going to do slope first. Let's find our pattern. So -2 to 0, 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8. I notice, especially when I get to my positives, that I'm adding 2 each time. So -2 plus 2 is 0, 0 plus 2 is 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, 4 plus 2 is 6, 6 plus 2 is 8. For my x, notice it just goes up by 1. That was a little rough there. Okay, so if I add 1 plus 1, I get 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. And 5 plus 1 is 6. I'm off a little bit there. Okay, so remember, this is my change in y, and this is my change in x. So to find my slope, I'm going to do change in y, which is 2, over change in x, which is 1, and then divide it. So 2 divided by 1 is 2. Okay, my x-intercept, which I believe is next on my list, a little bit, is going to be when I have a 0 for my y. Okay, so I have a 0 right here for my y. So that gives me my x-intercept, which is 2, 0. And my y-intercept is when I have a 0 for my x. Okay, notice I don't have that there, so we actually need to continue our pattern again. So I'm going to go backwards because I know 0 is going to go right here, just above the 1. So if I go backwards, instead of add 2, I'm going to subtract 2. I get 0, -4 for my y-intercept. Okay, let's go ahead and do the next one. Pattern. A little interesting there. So +2, +1, no, +2, +1, +3. +2. It must be a typo. Let's change this to a 3 to make that work. That's not a 3. Let's make that a 3 on our sheet to make this one work. So instead, this is still a +2, not +2. Okay, so fix that typo for me. Apologize for that. That is my change in y. Okay, over here, notice -3 plus 1 is -2, -2 plus 1 is -1, -1 plus 1 is 0, 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. Missed an arrow there. Okay, so if I fix this typo and make that a 3, I get my change in y, which is 2, or my change in x, which is 1. So I have the same slope this time that I had before. For my x-intercept, I'm looking for when my y is 0. Here's my problem for this one. My y is 0 right here in the middle. Okay, so in between those two. So what's in between -1 and -2? It's actually -1.5. So my x-intercept is -1.5. My y-intercept is going to be when my x is 0. So I have 0, 3 once I fix that typo. Okay, so both these are a little bit trickier. You need to continue your patterns either way to make sure you find your x and y intercept. And then in the second one, my 0 doesn't show up in my graph, but table. I can actually kind of approximate where that would show up. So I know 0 is between -1 and 1, so I put it there. And my value between -1 and -2 is -1.5. Okay. If you have any questions, go ahead and hit pause. Raise your hand. Let me know. I'll help you out. If you feel pretty confident, go ahead and try these guided practice problems. And when you have those done, have them checked by me to make sure you're okay. And then there's going to be a second video talking about the next slide. So finish these up, raise your hand, have them checked, and then you can move on.